Hi, everybody. This is Hondo Carpenter from Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast, joined by my dear friend, uh, personal friend, buddy, Matt Haladik, who's the editor and publisher, and my colleague from thespun.com. The Spun is a really fun website. I look at it every morning. It's a conglomeration of anything trending in the sports world, and I mean any sports. Formula One, golf, NFL, obviously the bigger sports when they trend, like the NFL, get the biggest amount of attention, but it's still a great website. If you're a person who would not be accused of being a follower of pop culture, it's a good place to go. Thank you, Matt. You saved, my son loves you. And you've helped me many a times when I didn't understand what he's talking about. I just go to the spun.com. Thank you.
I'm glad to be of service with that one.
We got just a couple weeks till training camp hits. So excited to get the year going. It's a lot of work for everybody involved, the players, the media, but man, it's so excited. Everybody loves this time of year. And as you know, we've been going through the position groups. We've talked about quarterbacks, we talked about running backs, we've discussed tight ends and wide receivers. Now we're going to dig in today on the most important part of any football team, the offensive line and defensive line. So let's go through the offensive line. You got Colton Miller and Dylan Parham over on the left. They're back. Andre James is back at center. Alex Bars is back at right tackle, at right guard. And Jermaine Illuminor is back at right tackle. We're going to get into the backups in a minute, but those are the starters from last year that blocked for the NFL's leading rusher. They were nowhere near as bad as the beating that they took. I think they were very good against the run. Obviously, you look at what Jacobs did. They were, I would say, better than average against in pass rush. The issue is they had some situations where Derek held the ball too long. And again, in this podcast, we don't talk down to fans, but one thing fans don't understand is what's rated a win and what's rated a loss by coaches. So, for example, if the offensive line keeps the defensive line off the quarterback, I know some teams it's 2.9 seconds. Sometimes it's 3.1, but let's just use an average of 3 seconds. 1,001, 1,002, 1,003. If a offensive line can keep the defensive line off for whatever amount each team uses, it's considered a win. So if the quarterback has to throw the ball away, you give credit to the defensive backfield downfield. Maybe the quarterback missed a read. Maybe the quarterback held the ball too long. I'm not saying they were the best pass blocking offensive line in all the NFL, but they were much better than people gave them credit for. And I think that's a big reason why the Raiders were like, listen, we've got our five. Let's stick with our five. I don't think they're as bad as they were rated, but I'd love your thoughts. What do you think of the starting five on the offensive line, Matt Haladik?
Well, obviously, it's going to be critical how well they protect, considering um, quarterback health, of course, is paramount for any team, but especially with a quarterback like Jimmy Garoppolo, who's missed some time with injuries frequently in his career. I think when you look at the left side, you have Colton Miller, who's the anchor there at left tackle, and Dylan Parham, who the Raiders believe is going to be a building block at left guard. So I think they feel really good about the left side the left side of that line. Excuse me. Center Andre James, I know, like you said, he's taken his fair share of criticism from Raider fans, but he's a known commodity for the staff. They obviously feel comfortable with him coming back and being in the pivot. And then when you move to the right side, I think they would like to see. We talked about this before when we talked about position battles. They would like to see Alex Bars step up again and really take command of that right guard spot. They have Greg Van Roten, who's a vet with a lot of experience behind him, but I think they prefer for him to be the guy that fills in a pinch and can take, some reps here and there if a guy goes down or if he's needed at different spots. They would like Bars, who's younger and has more of a future on paper, at least in the NFL, to assume that starting role. At right tackle, Jermaine Illuminor, I think, has the inside track to be the starter again. Another guy who I think you've said in the past is has been a target of fans' criticism. But it's a process in terms of I think what you're seeing the Raiders go for is continuity is big on the offensive line, a comfort level with the guy you're next to that he's going to be in the right spot. He's understanding protections. He's understanding things on the fly. And I think the Raiders are banking on if they have the same pretty much 5-man unit they used all of last year, that unit taking a step forward as a group with additional reps, additional time, and perhaps some wrinkles with the scheme.
So I have him taking 10 linemen, which I know is a lot. Let's talk about some of the other guys I've got him taken that I think are going to be very, very interesting. You've got obviously, and we're talking about guys that were not in the starter last year. I think McClendon Curtis is a undrafted free agent who's got a really good shot. Here's what I think about him. I think now obviously you can protect them on your practice, but if they don't keep him, there's going to be some other teams that are really looking at him. McClendon McCurtis out of UT Chattanooga, he's really, really good. Then you mentioned Greg Van Roten, who they really like. He's Mr. Durability. He could play either guard spot. He gonna make this roster. Even if they don't take 10, he's gonna be on this roster. And it's interesting with him and McClendon McCurtis. Then you come across Brandon Parker, who's a swing tackle. You got Thayer Mumford, who's a swing tackle. Again, I expect him to make it as well. And all of a sudden now you've got a real interesting offensive line. So let's talk about McClendon Curtis, Van Roten, Parker, Mumford. Let's talk about those guys. Give me some thoughts there.
Well, obviously, Van Roten, we touched on. He's a guy, the Jets, the Panthers, the Bills. He's been all over. He's started. He's played multiple positions. He's the type of solid, experienced veteran depth that you want there. Brandon Parker's been a starter in the past. And I think when you're looking at a swing tackle, you're always looking for guys who have been starters or played a lot of big minutes. Another guy I'm looking at too that you would know more about his chances of making the roster, but he's a player who I remember when he was a recruit in high school, and now he's had some experience playing in New England. Justin Heron as another option at tackle.
Yep.
Then when you get into Thayer Munford, obviously came from a major program in Ohio State, only a 7th-round pick, but he's going into his second season, and I think they're still trying to figure out where he would be best served, where he fits in best on the offensive line. Usually, a guy that you draft, even if it's a late round pick, if they're showing a little promise, you try to hold on to him for at least 2 seasons, maybe a third, to see what you got with him. So I would expect he would make the roster. And then did you? I don't know if you mentioned it. I'm not. I admit I'm not too familiar with McClendon Curtis. I don't know if you mentioned who would be the backup center in this scenario.
Well, Dylan Parham would be.
Okay.
And then because he played some center when James was hurt, you slide him over. Then you put Van Roten at his guard
Right.
spot or a potential McClendon Curtis. And I
That
said they
makes
were taking. I said I expected them to take 10. I meant 9. But here's the thing about Heron. I really like him too a lot. And I think this is just going to be one of those things. Okay, do we keep Heron and cut Brandon Parker? Well, Brandon Parker missed all of last year, and they kept him because they believed in him. They really thought that prior to his injury that he was showing some flash. Okay, do they gamble with a McClendon if he doesn't have a great camp? Maybe you can, and then you keep Heron. I think it's just going to be a fun battle to watch. But I think I don't think the offensive line, Matt, is as bad as people think. How about you?
no. I think there's definitely some pieces there, and I agree that you know I think one of the things that we didn't really touch on that will be interesting to see is are there some schematic changes with a Jimmy Garoppolo that make your offensive line look a little bit better? Are they moving him outside the pocket more? Are they running some different kinds of looks where they're changing the launch point for the quarterback so he's not necessarily just a pure pocket guy. Um, Not that Derek Carr is completely immobile, he's not, but Jimmy Garoppolo, when healthy, is more of a mobile play action, rollout type guy. So if you
Yep.
start to use some of that, that usually is a way to make your line a lot more comfortable, settle into games, and look a little bit better. So I'm curious not just to see what the linemen do individually and as a unit, just head up in terms of execution, but what does Josh McDaniels do different schematically, maybe to take advantage of what his linemen do well and mitigate what they might not do well?
Agree with you 100%. We're talking to Matt Hladek from thespun.com. You're listening to Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast. Now we're going to switch to the defensive side of the ball, the defensive line. We've already talked previously about the defensive ends. I expect them to keep 4 of them. Now we're going to take a minute and look at the defensive tackles. So I expect them to keep 6 defensive tackles. You obviously, which is a lot, and I know that, but I want to go through and explain why I feel that way. First, the rookie, Byron Young. I mean, from Alabama, he's making this team. This is a kid that a lot of fans kind of were shocked that the Raiders picked him where they did. However, they had him rated super high. He's a juggernaut on the run. And at Alabama, he'd come off the field a lot in pass rushing situations just because Alabama, like a hockey team, could bring players in waves. And so when he was allowed to rush, he was very productive, but they didn't let him do that a ton. But we've talked about that ad nauseum. And so I think he's there. I also think Bilal Nichols, he's a guy that's a veteran presence. He's a teacher, but there's no issues. He's a producer. They're going to keep him. Jerry Tillery is a guy who has Tarzan talent. I mean, this guy is just an absolute monster. Now, mental mistakes are there, and that's what's hurt him in his career, but he's still just absolute beast. You know, the Raiders fans are all going to remember a stupid penalty last year, and it was stupid. Not saying he's stupid. I'm saying the penalty was. But he's a guy that's just so much talent and played really well at times last year. He's there. And then you come in, though, and you've got, I already mentioned Neil Farrell, guy coming onto his sophomore campaign. Him and Matthew Butler were 2 guys that were not highly productive last year as rookies. Both of them, especially Farrell, though, really, as soon as the season was over, got to work. Okay, this is what I've got to do to make this team. Both of them higher, 4th, 5th round draft picks coming into their sophomore campaign. I just don't see either one of them the way they came into the offseason getting moved. Then you've got Jade Nesta Silvera. He's another rookie drafted out of Arizona State that they really like. They have some connection to him. My point is, you got 4 guys that are sophomores or rookies. So, man, that's a good sign for your off defensive line if they produce. And you got to keep 1 or 2 at least proven guys. I think you keep Tiller and Bilal. Your thoughts there, because I know that's keeping a lot of defensive linemen. But when you got 4 rookies on 1st or 2nd year deals, that's a good sign for your team.
Yeah, it's just about kind of figuring out which guys are going to be your building blocks that you can trust down the line out of those younger, for the time being, cheaper players. Obviously Byron Young, 3rd round pick, he's going nowhere. He's in their plans this year, whether it will be as a starter, whether it will be in the rotation, that will be determined. But he's going to be a big part of what they do. I think I would be shocked if either one of those first 2 vets who are projected starters aren't there, and Tillery and Nichols. So that's 3 right off the bat defensive tackle spots that are filled. After that, it gets a little interesting because here's the thing: if you, like you said, if you draft a guy 4th, 5th round, you're expecting them to be able to see the field and contribute at least in certain packages or certain situations. And that's where Neil Farrell and Matthew Butler were picked last year. So here's the thing. Obviously, they believed in them enough, this staff, this regime, to take them in the middle rounds and think that they could be assets in terms of younger assets at that position, where they wouldn't have to spend big money and go get veterans. And they showed, you said they showed a little bit of flashes, but it wasn't the productivity the Raiders hoped. Huge
I mean, there
summer
were
camp.
games where they didn't even dress.
Right, exactly, exactly. So, when you're inactive or you're not dressing, that's an issue. Um, Nesta Jade Silvera, like you said, seventh round pick. Sometimes you see teams try to get through those seventh round picks on the practice squad, but you never know how another team might have rated him coming out, might have looked at him. Uh, there's less preseason action for those guys than there used to be, but if he flashes during a preseason game, you think, well, would another team try to poach him from our practice squad? So that gives him a leg up there. And then another couple of guys, we're talking about John Jenkins, who's been in the league a long time and,
Great guy.
has a lot of experience, has the veteran presence. This is just what I think most teams do. If there's if Jenkins and another player are kind of on even footing or battling, they might go with the youth because they say, hey, this is a guy that can be developed. We don't know yet
And
what we
cheaper.
have in him. That too, of course. Um, so that's one area where I think a guy like a Matthew Butler or Neil Farrell have um, over, a John Jenkins, and then Adam Butler's still in the mix as well too. So I was smiling when you brought up the defensive line because I think that defensive line, not just the edge rushers too, which we've talked about in the past, but the defensive tackle. There's a lot of fun position battles, and when you've covered training camp, whether it's at the college or professional level, it can be a grind. It's hot. It can get boring. It can get tedious. But what makes it fun are those position battles and those guys duking it out to make roster spots or earn a spot in the starting team. And I think the Raiders have a lot of competition on the defensive line this summer, so that should be something that fans should be interested in paying attention to.
Matt, you and I, we're one of those podcasts. We don't talk down to fans. Without them, you and I don't have a job. And I think it's preposterous the way the media, and not just sports, politics, whatever, the way they talk down to people who are their viewers and watchers. We just don't do that. But one thing that, and we're not shills for the team. Neither one of us gets a paycheck from the team. But I think if you're a Raider, I was in the airport recently, and I was in Germany, and a person came over to me and happens to be a Raider fan and recognized me, and we are just sitting there visiting in Germany, and they said to me, um, "What are some reasons to be optimistic about this team?" They were very negative about the team. They're a military member, and I said, "There are going to be players cut off the offensive line and defensive line. They're going to be signed by other teams and be contributors." I said, "How long has it been since you've been able to say on the Raiders offense and defensive line that there's going to be people get cut and other teams are going to be circling, waiting for the Raiders scrap?" Now, you and I aren't shilling for the team, but that's a fact. That is a reality. If you let an Adam Butler go, a Jenkins go, if you let a Thayer Mumford, let's say he doesn't keep a role there, or a McClendon Curtis, you're going to have guys that other teams are going to covet and want. And that tells you how Dave Ziegler's building the roster. It may not be a lot of superstars, but he's building it with a lot of guys that price-wise are very favorable to the cap. And he's getting guys who are good, solid role players. Do you disagree with me on that?
No, I don't. I think that's every year. That's kind of a testament to a team's roster after cut down day. How many of their guys, excuse me, get picked up? Um, that and then in free agency, how many of their free agents that played big roles get signed elsewhere? Because that'll tell you a lot about what the relative strength of the roster is and how it's perceived league wide. So I think there are going to be some guys that don't make the Raiders 53 man that get signed elsewhere. And not just, get picked up as depth or, just like bodies or anything like that, but get picked up to play a role. And I think that's a good sign, especially along your offensive and defensive lines, which are the most important position groups in the most important position groups, most important position is starting quarterback, but you need the trenches to be solid, to be a good football team. They set your floor. Um, and I think that I understand where Raiders fans are coming from, a lot of them, because I understand from being out here in New York and with the Giants and the Jets, how many fans, and I grew up, I'm a Giants fan, so I know, and I know a lot of people who are Jets fans, how kind of cynical and kind of, negative you get after a while of losing or not living up to expectations. So I understand where you're not hopeful. You don't necessarily think that things are going to break your way. You're waiting for the shoe to drop. So I don't fault Raider fans for feeling like that at all. But I do think there are some reasons for there to be some optimism around this team and around this roster. And I think we touched on some of them today.
Matt, I got to say one thing in defense of Raider Nation is the Jets and Giants aren't out there selling their fans on merchandise and on their buildings. Just win, baby.
That is
I
true.
mean, I'll tell you a funny story. I was talking to a Raiders exec, and they were not talking bad about the fans. I don't want you to hear that. But they said to me, "Do you think sometimes the fans don't understand, the building process?" And they hadn't been with the team a long time. And I looked at them and said, "Do you not understand that you work for a franchise that is selling them just win, baby?" I mean, that is from the very top. That is your motto. It's everywhere you look when it comes to Raider stuff. You can't sell them that and then get mad at them for that. And he looked at me, and he hadn't been with the organization a long time, but he looked at me and he goes, "Oh, blank." He goes, "I never thought about it that way." He goes, "That makes total sense." And now every time I see him, just win, baby. And I really appreciated his attitude, but I'm going to defend Raider fans because when I do interviews around the country, people always say to me, "Oh, they're the most unreasonable fans." I'll say, "Wait a minute, I disagree with that. It may be one of the most unreasonable franchises slogans, but I don't put that on the fans when it's like a kid. If his dad says, 'Hey, listen, I'm gonna pick you up at 3 o'clock and I'm gonna take you to go get a banana split every day," and for years, Dad, even though he says it every day, doesn't pick him up, take him for a banana split. Is that 5 or 6 year old kid wrong for expecting Dad to pick him up for banana split? Of course not. That's what Dad said. I mean, a dad's word should be the most valuable thing in a home. And so when I explain it to people like that, every day this is what they're sold. I think they deserve a little bit more grace than NFL world's giving them. Your thoughts?
I would agree, and especially when you think about the fact that that was Al Davis's slogan for years, and this is now 40 years this year since their last world championship. So, and again, that's not the last time they were good. They had some other good teams after 83 during the 80s and in the early 90s as well when they were in the playoffs and late 90s. Of course, 01 Chuck Rule game, 02 they get to the Super Bowl. So it's not like they were totally bad for 40 years, but it's been a while since they have won the big game and have been a consistent, even a regular season performer. And I think about like I have a close friend out here in Jersey who's a Raider fan. He's 36, so he's my age, and his dad's in his 60s, and also a big Raider fan. And for him, he's kind of used to, even though he experienced in high school the Super Bowl appearance against the Bucks, he's kind of used to the losing and things of that nature. But his dad, who's in his 60s, I mean, he grew up as a Raider fan in the 70s when they were competing for championships every single year. He was in his 20s probably. Yes, in his 20s when they won championships in the 80s. He knows what it's like to see a Raider franchise that's on top. And I think there's a lot of fans out there that still remember that and still have pride in that. And they're saying, hey, when are we going to see that again? You can't continue to sell us this bill of goods of, just win baby, and, commitment to excellence and all these slogans that Al Davis had. And not deliver. And I do believe, Mark Davis being the son of Al Davis, it's not that he doesn't care or he's not trying. He wants to win. He definitely, he's not a
100%
deadbeat
agree.
owner. 100%. He wants to win. He wants to deliver a winner, but he's got to do it. And that's what fans are waiting on. They're saying, don't just tell me about the labor, show me the baby.
You know, that is one of the number one questions I get from fans when I'm out in public and or in my emails. Mark Davis, Mark Davis, Mark Davis. And I am not shilling for Mark. You can make an argument whether he's a good owner or a bad owner. But I'm going to tell you, don't say he doesn't care. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, he sits on his billions given to him by his dad. He doesn't care. Not true. Now, you can make some arguments on some of the decisions he's made, and those are fair arguments, but it's not about intent, and his intent's in the right spot. But man, when the franchise is selling you just win, you can't get mad at the fans for saying, okay, just win then. That's what you're telling me. Very fascinating conversation today. Matt, I appreciate you. Next week, we're going to take a long look at defensive backs, linebackers, and wide receivers. So it's going to be a good one. I'm looking forward to that. Thank you for your time, my friend.
Anytime. It's always a pleasure.
Appreciate you, buddy. This is Hondo Carpenter from Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation, part of the Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast, part of the Fans First Sports Network, joined by my friend and the editor and publisher of thespun.com, the great Matt Holadik, talking to you about some Raiders. Thanks, everybody.